The families had just won the prize. The confetti was ready. The checks were about to be handed out. But then one word stopped everything. One sentence turned a game show into something no one in that studio would ever forget. Steve Harvey stood frozen at his podium. His signature smile vanished. The audience, 300 people who had been cheering seconds ago, went completely silent. Producers in the control room leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. Because what the winning family had just said wasn't in the script. It wasn't part of the show. And it was about to change everything. "We don't want the money," the grandmother said, her voice steady but soft. "We want to give it all to the children's hospital." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Family Feud had ever been. Steve's mouth opened. Then closed. He looked at the family. Then at the audience. Then back at the family. For the first time in decades of hosting, Steve Harvey had no idea what to say next. But nobody knew why they were doing this. And when Steve found out, he stopped being a host and became something else entirely. If you want to see what happened next, subscribe now, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Rewind to 3 hours earlier. The Johnson family had driven 6 hours to get to the Family Feud studio. 5 people packed into an old sedan. Margaret, the 72-year-old grandmother who had raised them all after their parents died in a car accident 15 years ago. Her daughter Linda, now 41, who worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat. Linda's 3 kids, Marcus, 19, studying nursing while working nights. Shanice, 17, who spent her weekends volunteering at the children's hospital. And little Devin, 12, the baby of the family, whose laugh could light up any room. They had applied to be on Family Feud not for fame or glory, but because they needed help. Medical bills from Margaret's recent heart surgery had piled up. The mortgage was 3 months behind. Devin's school supplies were bought on credit cards they couldn't pay off. They were drowning, slowly but surely, in the kind of debt that makes you choose between medicine and groceries. But they had something most families didn't have, each other. And they had Margaret, who taught them that no matter how little you have, you always have enough to give. In the green room before the show, Margaret gathered her family in a circle. She held their hands, her weathered fingers gripping theirs with surprising strength. "Whatever happens out there," she said, "we play with love. We play with honor. And we remember why we're here." "To win money, Grandma," Devin said, confused. Margaret smiled, the kind of smile that held decades of wisdom. "No, baby. We're here to show people what family means. The money, that's just a bonus." None of them knew how prophetic those words would be. The show started like any other episode. Steve Harvey walked out in his perfectly tailored suit, flashing that $1,000,000 smile, cracking jokes that had the audience roaring with laughter. The Johnson family stood at their podium, nervous but excited. Across from them, the Martinez family, equally eager, equally deserving. The first few rounds went by in a blur of buzzers, laughter, and correct answers. But backstage, something was happening that nobody in the studio could see. During a commercial break, while the audience stretched and checked their phones, Shanice stepped away from her podium. She walked to the edge of the stage where a production assistant was standing. "Excuse me," Shanice said quietly. "Is there any way we could talk to Mr. Harvey? Before the final round?" The PA looked confused. "That's not really how we do things. Is something wrong?" "No," Shanice said. "Something's right. We just need 1 minute with him." The PA radioed to the producer, who radioed to Steve's assistant, who whispered in Steve's ear during the commercial break. Steve looked over at the Johnson family, saw something in their faces that made him nod. "Give me 5 minutes after this round," he said. Nobody in the audience knew about this conversation. The cameras didn't capture it. But it was about to change the entire trajectory of the show. The game continued. The Johnson family was on fire. Margaret, despite her age, was answering questions like she had written the survey herself. Marcus brought energy and precision. Linda kept everyone focused. Shanice's quiet confidence steadied the team. And Devin, whenever he got to answer, brought such joy to his responses that even the opposing family couldn't help but smile. By the time they reached the final round, Fast Money, the Johnson family had built a commanding lead. If they could score 200 points in Fast Money, they would win $20,000. Life-changing money for a family like theirs. Steve stood between the two podiums, doing what he did best, making people feel seen, valued, and entertained. But there was something different in his eyes now. He kept glancing at the Johnson family with a look that wasn't quite curiosity, wasn't quite concern. It was more like recognition, as if he saw something of himself in them. Margaret and Marcus stepped up for Fast Money. The clock started. Question after question, their answers were solid. The audience gasped, cheered, counted points out loud. When the final answer was revealed, the scoreboard lit up, 201 points. They had won. The studio exploded with applause. Confetti began to fall. Steve Harvey walked toward the family with a giant ceremonial check. But then Margaret raised her hand, and everything stopped. "Mr. Harvey," she said, her voice cutting through the celebration like a gentle knife. "Before you give us that check, we need to say something." Steve paused mid-step. The confetti continued to fall in slow motion. The audience quieted again, confused. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't how game shows worked. "We're grateful for this opportunity," Margaret continued. "More grateful than we can say. But 3 months ago, my granddaughter Shanice started volunteering at St. Jude's Children's Hospital. She's been reading to the kids there, playing with them, bringing them little gifts we could barely afford." Shanice's eyes filled with tears. She looked down, embarrassed by the attention. "And she came home one day," Margaret said, "and told us about a little girl named Emma. 7 years old. Fighting leukemia. And Emma told Shanice that her biggest dream was to have her hospital room painted like a princess castle, but the hospital didn't have funding for things like that." Steve Harvey's face changed. The entertainer mask slipped away, revealing something raw underneath. "So we talked as a family," Margaret said. "And we made a decision. If we won today, we would donate the entire $20,000 to St. Jude's Children's Hospital. For Emma's room. And for whatever other kids need." The studio was silent. 300 people holding their breath. Cameras zoomed in on Steve, catching the exact moment a tear formed in his left eye. "Ma'am," Steve said, his voice thick, "you don't have to do this. You won this money. You earned it. And I know you need it. We do need it." Linda spoke up, her voice breaking. "We need it more than you know. My mother is still paying off medical bills. We're behind on our mortgage. My kids are making sacrifices every single day." "Then why?" Steve started, but couldn't finish the question. Marcus stepped forward. "Because Grandma taught us something. She taught us that being broke and being poor are two different things. Broke is temporary. Poor is when you stop caring about anyone but yourself. We might not have money, Mr. Harvey. But we're not poor." The audience erupted. Not with applause, but with something deeper. A sound that was part sob, part cheer, part collective exhale of humanity recognizing itself. Steve Harvey set the oversized check down. He walked away from his mark, breaking every rule in the television handbook. He walked straight to Margaret and pulled her into a hug. His shoulders shook. The grandmother who had raised 5 people on faith and food stamps held the man who had entertained millions, and for a moment, they were just two human beings recognizing the sacred in each other. When Steve finally pulled back, he was wiping his eyes with his hands. His makeup was ruined. He didn't care. "You know what?" Steve said, turning to the camera, speaking directly to America. "We're going to do something we've never done in the history of this show. Johnson family, you're getting your $20,000 for the hospital." The family started to protest, but Steve held up his hand. "But," he continued, "you're also getting $20,000 for yourselves. Because I'm personally matching your donation. And I'm calling on everyone watching this show, everyone in this studio, everyone who believes that this kind of love still exists in the world, to match it too. The audience didn't just stand. They surged forward. People were crying, reaching out, wanting to touch this moment, to be part of it. Behind the scenes, before the family had made their announcement, Shanice had shown Steve a photo on her phone. Emma in her hospital bed, holding a drawing she had made of her dream princess room. Steve had looked at that photo for 30 seconds without saying a word. Then he had looked at Shanice and said, "You're going to change the world, young lady." "I just want to help Emma," Shanice had said. "That's how you change the world," Steve had replied. Now, standing on that stage with the Johnson family, Steve reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his personal business card and handed it to Marcus. "You're studying nursing?" Steve asked. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. "When you graduate," Steve said, "you call that number. I know people at every major hospital in this country. We're going to make sure you get the best opportunities. Because the world needs nurses who understand what you understand." He turned to Shanice. "And you. You keep doing what you're doing. Keep seeing people. Keep caring. That's a superpower, and don't let anyone tell you different." To Devin, he knelt down to eye level. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "I want to be like Grandma," Devin said simply. Steve smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and beyond. "Then you're going to be just fine. Subscribe and leave a comment, because what happened next, what happened after the cameras stopped rolling, is the part that will restore your faith in everything." The episode aired 3 weeks later. Within hours, the St. Jude's Children's Hospital donation fund that Steve had set up received over $2 million from viewers across the country. Emma got her princess room. And 37 other children got their dream rooms too. But money wasn't the only thing that poured in. Letters arrived at the Family Feud studio by the thousands. People sharing their own stories of sacrifice, of choosing love over comfort, of families holding together against impossible odds. One letter came from a man in Ohio who wrote, "I was about to give up. I was about to walk away from my family because the pressure was too much. But I watched your episode, and I saw that grandmother's face, and I remembered why I'm here. I'm still here. Thank you." Another came from a young woman in Texas. "I've been volunteering at a food bank for 3 years, but I was starting to think it didn't matter. That nothing I did mattered. But Shanice reminded me that it does. Every single act of love matters. I'm not quitting." The Johnson family paid off their medical bills and their mortgage. They established a scholarship fund at their local community college for students studying nursing or medicine. Marcus graduated at the top of his class and now works in pediatric oncology. Shanice went on to study social work and runs a program that pairs volunteers with hospitalized children. Devin is 15 now. He volunteers at the same children's hospital where his sister started. And when people asked him why, he says, "Because Grandma taught us that the best way to take care of yourself is to take care of others." Margaret passed away 2 years after the show aired. Peaceful, in her sleep, surrounded by the family she had built from broken pieces. At her funeral, Steve Harvey showed up unannounced. He stood in the back, watching as hundreds of people whose lives Margaret had touched came to say goodbye. When the service ended, he approached the family. "Your grandmother," Steve said to them, "taught me something that day on the show. She reminded me why I do what I do. It's not about the laughs or the ratings or the fame. It's about moments like that one. Moments when we get to see the best of who we can be." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It was the photo Shanice had shown him that day in the studio. Emma in her hospital bed with her drawing. "I've carried this with me every day since we taped that episode," Steve said. "Every time I think I'm tired, or I don't want to show up, or I forget why any of this matters, I look at this. And I remember." He handed the photo to Shanice. "Emma drew you a new picture before she went into remission. She wanted me to give it to you. It's a picture of a superhero. She said it's you?" The day after Margaret's funeral, Steve Harvey announced a new initiative, the Margaret Johnson Foundation, funding hospital volunteer programs across America. Because sometimes the greatest prize isn't what you win. It's what you give away. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Because in a world that constantly tells us to take more, get more, keep more, the Johnson family reminded us of something we desperately needed to remember. The only wealth that matters is the kind you can hold in your hands. Steve Harvey still carries Emma's drawing in his pocket. And every time he walks onto that Family Feud stage, he looks out at the families standing at those podiums, and he sees what he saw that day in the Johnsons, the unbreakable beauty of people who understand that love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice. And it's the only choice that ever really mattered.